journeys ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can.
Hello everyone, it's Brian. I'm back again with another video in the Middle-earth Ranger series. Today we're going to be talking about the very first skill that is ever mentioned in the books that Aragorn possesses. And we find that in Chapter 2 of the Fellowship of the Ring, The Shadow of the Past. And if you go in here and you look at this, you see Gandalf talking to Frodo, and they're talking about finding Gollum. And it says here that he had, Gandalf is speaking, and he said he had the help of his friend Aragorn, the greatest traveler and huntsman of this age of the world. So, traveler is what we're going to be focusing on today. If you fast forward to chapter 11, and we're on the chapter A Knife in the Dark, we again see that skill referenced. Here we have Aragorn talking about Bill Ferny having watched where they're going to be leaving the road, and that he said Bill Ferny probably wouldn't be following them into the wood because he knew he was no match for Aragorn in a wood. So the ability to travel, to navigate is very important. Obviously, we have a group that is on a long journey, so being able to find your way from point A to point B is pretty significant. Now, this is something that I trained extensively on in the military. I actually did instruct land navigation using a lensatic compass and a topographical map. But you never really see that reflected in Middle-earth. Compasses are never mentioned. They do have the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. Those are definitely mentioned on a regular basis, but you never actually see a compass being used. So, while I would love to do a video on land navigation, as I'm most familiar with it, that's really not going to be applicable to what we're talking about, though there are some concepts from that I am going to pull over. Also, my other hesitation for doing a land navigation video is that there are a lot of really, really good ones on there, out on YouTube by people that know more about the process than I do. So if you're looking for those, Derek Feria did an excellent one. It's probably one of the best ones that I've seen. So go out there and take a look at that. But if we look through the books, and not just in The Lord of the Rings, but just in the Fellowship of the Ring rather, but all through the trilogy, and not just looking at Aragorn, how are people mostly navigating? There's two basic principles that they tend to use. They have a general knowledge of the geography and the topography, married with a ability to discern the cardinal directions. So if you take that, if you look at it, most of the time they're applying, if they're not on a road, they're applying their bearings to a known land feature, like we're going to keep the road to our left to the east, or they know if we travel to the north, we're going to hit this road or this river, or they're using a major land feature such as Weathertop to navigate by. So in Aragorn's case, he's in his 80s. He's been traveling Middle Earth for 60 years at this point plus, and he is very, very familiar with the geography and the topography pretty much everywhere, so he doesn't really get lost a lot. Now we do see the situation after Weathertop where they're trying to reach Rivendell and they're going up through the Trollshaws where he gets kind of off course and he's further to one direction than he wants to be, but that really is more of a the restrictions of the terrain, similar to what we see in the Old Forest with the hobbits. You know, they're being forced by the terrain to go in a direction that they don't want to go. But we still do see him able to find his way back in relation to what's going on. So in order to take those principles and really apply them to the areas where we're going to be adventuring, you know, exploring the wilderness and everything, you either have to be operating in a known area that you are very familiar with. For example, I grew up, my grandparents had a 50-acre farm, and I spent as much of my childhood as I possibly could on that farm, and we would tromp through the woods. I knew those woods. I knew where the streams were, I knew where the fences were, I knew where the downed trees were. I was familiar with it, so I didn't need a map. And at any given time, you could have spun me around and I could have come out of that spin and pointed towards my grandparents' house. I knew the area. And there's something crawling on my hood. Where are you? There was an ant apparently deciding to traverse my hood. So I knew the area. But if you're going into an area where you either have never been or you don't go often enough to become that intimately familiar with it, then you're going to get your geographical knowledge from a map. And I would recommend, no matter how authentic you're trying to be, I would recommend carrying a map. Even if you're not getting a U.S. Geological Survey topographical map, if that's not what you're carrying, you should have something like that that you're basing the map that you're carrying on. And I'm probably going to do a video at some point because that is something that I've done in the past, is take an actual topographical map and convert it over into a map that was more traditional feeling, just to kind of not take you out of the moment. But I do like having a map, and maps are mentioned. Frodo talks about poring over the maps in Rivendell, and when he is further on in his journey, he's referring back to his memory of maps, and other characters talk about maps, and a lot of times in cases like I believe it's Pippin that's talking about how he wishes he had spent more time looking at the maps. So we know maps were used. We don't see them carrying the maps other than Thorin's party carrying the map of the Lonely Mountain that shows where the secret gate is, a secret door rather. But maps are definitely mentioned, so I don't feel like having a map is inauthentic. But if you have a map that is accurate and you can orient it to the landscape, you have your major terrain features on it, you still need to be able to discern direction. And probably most importantly, even if you can't discern direction and you don't have a map, if you can travel in a straight line, most of the time you're going to have a fairly fair chance of finding your way out of an area if you're lost. So get a map, study the map before you go. And one concept that the military taught with land navigation courses, but also anytime you were going to be navigating in in a wilderness essentially, is know and escape azimuth. So what is an escape azimuth? So I'm going to just throw up a picture of a map here. This is of the Sipsey River Wilderness in Alabama, one of my favorite places to backpack and camp. And if I am in the wilderness area, the primary wilderness area that I actually camp in this part of the woods, I know that at any given time I can travel due east and I will hit a road. And that if I travel on that road, and just knowing the topography of it, downhill I will get to the Sipsey River, which is one of the main parking areas, which is normally where my car is parked. So if I get lost, I can head east, hit the road, follow the road downhill, and I'll get to the river where my car is parked. Like that. So if you get in trouble, knowing a direction you can go that will get you to a known point that you can then orient yourself from. If all else fails, your map is destroyed, you lose everything else, you know if I can go in this direction and I can travel in a straight line, I will get to something that will get me to safety. So that's a really important thing to plan anytime you're going to be out in the wilderness. But sometimes you're going to need to be able to discern direction. Now there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. There's a lot of myths around that, so do your research on that, like the whole, moss only grows on the north side of a tree. No. If you live in Alabama, it's wet here. The same thing up in the Pacific Northwest, you might see moss all the way around a tree. Now, in general, in the northern hemisphere, the branches and everything are going to grow thicker on the southern side of a tree because that's where the more sunlight is. But you also have to look at the prevailing winds, because a tree is also going to grow into the prevailing wind, just kind of bracing itself. So take all of that with a grain of salt. The easiest way to know your direction is using the sun on a sunny day. So you might have been wondering why I have a stick in the ground. So I have begun a basic sun compass. So I took a stick, this one's about 2.5 feet long, I stuck it in the ground and I put another stake at the point where the tip of that shadow was cast. At the end of the video where I'm talking, I'll stick a stake wherever the point ended up. So that is a quick and simple way to get your direction. Obviously in the morning, if you wake up, the sun's going to be coming up in the east. So even if it's cloudy, you can still get a general idea of the direction just by where the light's coming up in the sky. At night, you can use the stars. So let's say it's been cloudy all day, you haven't been able to get a good sense of direction, and it clears up at night. Well, you find the Big Dipper. Again, this is northern hemisphere. I don't ever operate in the southern hemisphere. But do your research and figure out, which stars and everything, and how to do it if you are working in the southern hemisphere. But in the northern hemisphere, finding the Big Dipper, following the front edge of the Big Dipper out, you can locate the North Star. If you've located the North Star at night, mark the direction very clearly on the ground where north is. Draw a line, write an N, put sticks on the ground, something that won't be disturbed. So when you wake up the next day, if it's still cloudy, you'll have a very distinct, very correct north to start with for your travel. And once you have that, then you can orient your map, you can figure out where you are. If you are familiar with your map and you're staying up with your map, a lot of times you can figure out your directions even without having a compass. But being able to find true north is a very useful thing. Now, you have north, you've got your compass, you know your direction you want to travel in. One thing that's very difficult to do in the woods, and people don't even realize it, is walk in a straight line. Most people tend to veer from one side to the other. When I was first learning land navigation, one of the things that they did was you looked at a fixed point, and then they blindfolded you and told you to walk towards that fixed point. And everybody was, way off on either side, and this was over a 100-meter walk. Not a very long distance to veer off. So if you're, after 100 meters, you're 20 feet off left or right, you walk a mile and figure out where you're going to be. You're going to be just so far off your mark. So how do you walk a straight line? The most commonly used method, and the one that I've always been taught, is just the Leapfrog Method. You pick a landscape, pick a distinctive landmark in the direction that you're going, and then you pick one beyond that, and you keep those lined up, and you walk to the first one, and then you pick one beyond the next one, and you keep those two lined up. And that way you're ensuring using a fixed piece of the landscape that you're always walking in a straight line. That's, again, even if you don't know your directions, you don't know where you're going, most places where you're going to be camping, now there are definitely some wilderness areas that are vast, but a lot of places you're going to be camping, as long as you are moving in a straight line, you're eventually going to get to something that you can identify, a river, a road, a power line, something. So if you want to brush up on your navigational skills, start in an area where you know where you are. Make sure you have a map. Learn some ways to find direction, and it never hurts to take up some backup emergency modern equipment just for the safe side. That's one of the things that I do as far as medical equipment. I always carry some modern trauma gear with me just in case there's a serious injury, and obviously I always have my cell phone with me. Otherwise I wouldn't be able to film things and take pictures and things like that. So let's see how our our shadows getting on over here. Typically speaking, you're going to wait a little bit longer than this. Where it starts is going to be your west point. Where it ends is going to be your east point. So that is our east-west line here. West being that direction, east being that direction, north and south. So just sitting here for just a few minutes, we were able to discern our directions using a stick in the ground. Now I will say that I am on a slope here, which makes it a little bit trickier to see your shadows. If you can do this in a level area, it does work much better. Anyway, so that's all today for navigation, land navigation, etc. I'm just going to add this to my list of things once I actually do get a chance to go out in the wilderness to kind of demonstrate some of these skills. We'll talk about leapfrogging. Again, whenever we get to the point where we're map making, we'll touch back on this subject as well. But as one of the defining skills for Aragorn, it's really good to be able to find your way around in the woods. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you guys again soon on my next video.